Okay, he had a mother who was like the regent of the empire, and she. There were these two Roman generals. See, this is just an example of how Romans were just like fucking stuff up, left, right, and center. They didn't. They weren't taking these like. They weren't taking these barbaric tribes seriously enough to threaten Rome, and they were still doing that stupid infighting civil war, just to try to get power of the upper hand over the other guy within your own kingdom, which ended up destroying their kingdom because there were these two generals, and who didn't like each other because they were trying to vie for like top spot of general. And so it was one general who was the general of the Spanish area. And there was another general who was the general in Italy. And the general in Italy told the queen, or the mother of the emperor, that the other general was trying to plan a coup to take over the empire. So she went and so she believed him, and so she had him killed. So they lost their only like competent general in Spain because of that. And then they ended up getting their asses kicked in Spain by, I think, the Vandals. The Vandal tribe, which were, I don't know where they come from, like a Germanic tribe from the other side of the Rhine. And then the Vandals moved into Carthage, which was like the breadbasket of Rome. Like all of Africa was like, they could grow, for some reason, grow a lot of really good grain there from Egypt and Carthage. And they ended up taking over Carthage too. They beat the Romans in Carthage. And they killed Saint Augustine or something, who was this popular saint there. And then I think they moved into Rome and sacked Rome and destroyed Rome this time even more, and that's why the word vandalize comes from. And they deposed Romulus Augustulus and took over Rome. So that was the end of the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. That was it. No more Western Roman Empire. And then the Eastern Roman Empire, that's another story, though. That'll be the history of Greece. Woo, I got sidetracked, my God. So, back to the video. The title of the video, The History of Italy. So, here is post-Roman Empire Italy. What is becoming of post-Roman Empire Italy? Well, now you have the Vandals in there. And I think they were related to the Lombards, because the country in Italy after the Roman Empire was called Lombardia, the Lombards, Lombardia, and I think they were the Vandals. They were a Germanic tribe. So it was kind of like a reprogramming of the DNA, the physical DNA of the country of Italy. At this point, it was becoming less Mediterranean and more Nordic, because these Vandals and Visigoths, and same thing with Spain, but that's the history of Spain video. These Vandals were moving into Spain. Oh yeah, and the Vandals were Germanic. So they had Lombardia, and they could even trace their lineage, how they came from. They were way up there in Lithuania, and then 50 years later they were in Poland, and then 50 years later they were in Czech Republic, and then 50 years later they were in northern Italy, and then they set up shop in Italy, and they made their castle somewhere in northern Italy, and yeah, and then there was another kingdom, like in southern Italy, but they had the Pope, and they actually stretched the Pope lineage from Saint Peter was the first pope, and I think Peter was crucified in Rome. So that's kind of like why they chose Rome to be like the head of the Christian church, because Peter was designated by Jesus to be the caretaker of the Christian faith, and then he moved to Rome. So, and then they had like another dude who took over the church after Peter, and they all know about him is that his name was Linnaeus, and I think they even had one drawing of him or something, but they don't know much about him. And then they had like another pope, but they had like a constant line of popes. So even though Rome wasn't part of the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantinians were Christians, so they kind of still looked up to Rome as being like the head of the church, the caretakers of the new religion. It was kind of like, how Delphi was the religious center of all the Greeks, even though they were all independent Greek countries. It was kind of like that. Rome was the independent center of all of Christendom. The religion of everybody in of Europe was Christian. So yeah, here's where I'm a little bit hazy, but yeah, but they did have pope after pope, and then in the year 800, the pope popified, or no, he didn't. He the pope declared Charlemagne, who is a French king, from the Carolingian kingdom in like southern France, as like the Holy Roman Emperor, because he had taken over like all of Europe, and Germany for the first time. So they're like, you're the new Holy Roman Emperor, the new Roman Empire, Holy Rome. So he was like, all right, cool. So that was kind of like the beginning of like the unification of Europe, Christendom of Europe, sort of. But the popes still kind of had their own country, and for a while there, for a couple hundred years, the popes had their own country. Like they owned their own land, like the entire central part of Italy, and it was called the Papal States. And so it was kind of like a country. You know what I mean? It was a kingdom. The Pope wasn't just a religious leader; he was also a political figure, and so that they had to deal with all the stuff that political figures deal with, as far as violence. And they did have a few crises amongst the popes. They had, I think in the 1100s, they had a point where there was 3 dudes trying to be pope at the same time, because one pope moved up into France and set up popery up there in this big palace. And then he was there for like 50 years. Then he was like, all right, well, I'll go back to Italy. But by the time he came back to Italy, there was another dude there who was like, no way, I'm pope. Like the real pope's in Italy. But he was like, no way, but I'm pope. So then they were like, okay, well, all the other bishops or whatever were like, all right, well, let's just make a third pope. And then these 2 other guys can stop being pope. So they made a third pope. But the other 2 guys were like, no way, we're still pope. And then the third pope was like, no way, but I'm pope. So now there was 3 dudes who claimed to be pope. So then they were like, all right, let's do it again. Let's make a 4th pope, and then we'll depose all 3 of the other popes. And that worked. They made a 4th pope, and the 4th dude got to be pope, and then all the other 3 dudes were like, all right, fuck it, we can't be pope. And, yeah, and then they had some weird, like, political problems, like, dramatic stuff going on, like weird stuff. Like at one point, there was even a legend where there was a woman pope, Pope Joan, and supposedly she gave birth while giving mass. But now people think that that's just a story. I don't know how that could have even been taken seriously. But and like nobody knew she was a woman until she gave birth. But then there was another pope who it became really politicized. So people were basically buying themselves into being pope, and it was just like kind of like the Roman Empire again. Maybe it's good that the Roman Empire fell, because they had this one dude. He was pope, and he well, one dude, he became a bishop when he was like 8, and then he became pope when he was like 18, and he turned the Vatican, or wherever, what was the Vatican at that point, because St. Peter's wasn't built until like 1500. He turned it into a brothel, and so he was having sex all the time with all the girls and all his friends and stuff, and they were like drinking and partying all the time, but he was the Pope. So he was basically just the king of England, of Italy. Called himself the Pope. And he was fucking some other dude's wife when he had a stroke and died. And he was only 27 years old. So he partied pretty hardy. And then there was another Pope who, like, I guess did some stupid stuff. I don't know if it was the next Pope or whatever, but there was one Pope and he hated the Pope before him. So he dug his body up and he gave him an excommunication trial and sent him to hell, excommunicated him, and like banished him to hell. Banished the dead body to hell, and then dumped the dude's body into the Tiber River, like in front of everybody to see, and the people were like horrified by that. So they murdered him and set up another Pope. And yeah, and then like the power of the Pope got really big, from like Charlemagne. Like the Holy Roman Emperor was kind of like taking orders of in some way or another, religious religious jurisdiction and marriages and stuff, from like 800 all the way up until like 1300, and then the Vatican, the Pope started turning it into this like big political thing, where basically Rome was taxing people too much, just like in the days of Nero was taxing people too much. Only they weren't taxing people like for the Roman Empire, but they were making people pay to get into heaven. They were selling people's admittance into heaven because they were supposed to be the guardians of heaven. I guess they thought that Jesus said that like now St. Peter gets to be the new guardian of heaven, and whoever he chooses is the guardian of heaven after that, and they all believe that shit. So they were selling tithes to get into heaven, and that's what paid for St. Peter's Cathedral, which was created by some like architect, and the big fresco on the top of St. Peter's Cathedral, as well as that big thing of like God touching Abraham, was painted by Michelangelo. And this was actually a time of it was the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe, and that was because, and some historians like to be like, well, I don't know what caused the Renaissance. I'm sure it had something to do with the printing press or whatever, but it's obvious to me that the Renaissance was created by one thing only: the printing press. Okay. In like the year 1442 or something like that, Johannes Gutenberg, a German dude, invented the printing press. And after that, they started printing the Bible in German, in Gutenbergian, in Germany. And then it spread like wildfire, and they started to have the Bible all over the place. And that was not good for the Catholic Church, because people started to be able to read and think for themselves, and they didn't have to like get their minister from Rome to tell them what to think anymore, because they could read themselves and be like, and the Bible says this, and this means this, and which they could interpret to mean whatever the fuck they wanted it to mean, especially since, you know, if they're copying stuff hand by hand and from language to language, they could choose to change meanings. And it was actually the Romans who created the Bible in the first place, out of a whole bunch of different books. back in the year 323 or something, at the first Christian council, the Council of Nicaea. And yeah, so that was like the decadence, the height of the Roman Catholic Church. And they were also doing other weird stuff. The Catholic Church, they were letting, like, having all these, like, bishops, clergy, could, like, collect taxes. They were like a form of aristocracy. They could collect all these taxes from people. And so, but they would, like, give, like, one clergy dude, like, the title of, like, all these different places. Like, he could be, like, for example, Cardinal Wolsey. This was right before the Reformation in England for King Henry VIII. He basically ran the government for the king, but he was a Catholic cardinal. So it was basically like the Roman Empire still existed. You know, it was like England was a vassal country to Rome. It was a vassal country to the Roman Empire. It still freaking existed. Because the Bishop of Rome, who was dressed in Roman garb and answered to the Pope, was in control of England. He was like basically the Prime Minister of England. But he was really rich. He wasn't like Mr. like pious religious dude, monk. Wolsey was the cardinal, but he was also like the bishop of like all these different cities that he'd never even been to. He just had that title so that he could collect the taxes. And they had like a lot of these dudes all over Europe, like clergy dudes, who like just got rich as hell because they were like the bishop, you know, they were the representative of the Catholic Church of this town and that town and this province and that province. They'd never even been there. They were just collecting the money. And so then the real Catholic people who were like the priest or whatever in that town didn't know anything, but they had to answer to the dude above him. So it was really hierarchical, really not fair to poor people, and just superstitious by having people pay to get into heaven. And yeah, and all sorts of other like rites and rituals too. Like it kind of became like a Roman religion back again, you know. Like Jesus wasn't the only God. People would pray to Mother Mary. Mother Mary was like one of the gods in the Roman pantheon. That was the thing of Catholicism, and that's one thing that the Reformation got rid of. They took down the Mother Mary statues and said, okay, we pray to God, not Mary. And yeah, so there's this. So anyways, Martin Luther was like, okay, enough of this. This isn't fair. So he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of some church. It was like, yeah, you guys shouldn't charge so much for this. You guys shouldn't have this dude collecting money here or whatever. But it ended up starting a wildfire and basically making everybody rebel against the Catholic Church. And it turned his little thing into Lutheranism, into his own religion. Oh shit, I'm kind of getting away from Italy. And all of the kings and the nobles and stuff from the Holy Roman Empire and Germany and stuff went along with that because they were getting pissed off at having to share their money with the Pope. So anyways, this was like the end of the power of the Catholic Church. That was the beginning of Protestantism. But it was the same time as the Renaissance. So Italy, even though the Roman Church lost all that power and grandeur and wealth and everything, just after they made the big St. Peter's Cathedral, used all the money for that. Italy had another like explosion in power. Italy came back, not because of the Catholics or because of Rome, but because of the printing press, because of all this reawakening and the ability of people to share their knowledge and stuff. That's when they had Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Leonardo da Vinci was the first, they call it the Renaissance man. It's somebody who's really well educated and is a polymath and knows lots of different stuff. Back in the 1100s, in the Crusades, oh man, I forgot to talk about the Crusades. That was another Man, the history of Italy, dude. If you do a video on the history of Italy, you got to talk forever because everything comes from Italy because of the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. And then the Renaissance. Yeah, back in like the 1100s, um, um, they decided that they wanted to take over, you know, the Bishop of Rome decided he wanted to take over the Holy Land again because that's where Jesus came from. So he'd made this decree to let's go over there and take over the Roman Empire. So he collected all these, got all the like kingdoms and stuff around there to attack the the Middle East. And the main kingdoms that were really into that was France. That's what the Middle Eastern, the Islamic Middle Easterners referred to the Crusaders as the French. They called them the French because that's who maybe they came from. Maybe because Charlemagne came from France and he was supposed to be the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, and France was part of the Roman Empire, and so they could speak a language that was similar to Italian and stuff. But yeah, but also the English, like Richard the Lionheart was English, and he won some battles there. He only spent like 3 weeks in England as king. So, and then, and then they brought lots of like armies. And they did the Crusades. But one thing that the Crusades did was they realized that they didn't realize that the people they were attacking were actually more advanced than they were. Like the Islamic Empire, like based out of Baghdad in Iraq. And also those Islamics up there in Jerusalem and stuff were really had been, and also by then they had been living in Egypt, had been translating ancient Greek texts and had been redoing all the Greek experiments, finding out how big the earth was and all that stuff. And so when the Crusaders went there, they collected their books and translated them and brought them back to Europe. So then Europe started to become very, very educated again. And one of the countries in Europe that was becoming very educated, it was the Italians. And because they had the kingdom of that city in northeastern Italy that has all the waterways around it, Venice. It was the Kingdom of Venice, and they did lots of trading and were really rich, and so they knew a lot. And then they had the Black Plague. I'll talk about that really quickly. That originally came from the Middle East, where the Mongols were attacking, and they threw some dead bodies into this besieged city on the Crimea, and then they escaped and went back to Venice, and then some of the rats were infected, jumped off, went into Italy, and then spread all over Europe, killed a third to half the people in Europe, and which actually brought Europe up because it killed all the people. So then it abolished serfdom in Europe because then the peasants had more of a say on where they could go and what they could do because there were less of them. And and then there was the invention of the printing press and the Reformation. So Europe was starting to pump up and get up and more advanced. And the main country that was getting more pumped up and advanced was Italy. Italy was, they were starting to become a little bit, it's kind of like the beginnings of mercantilism, trade. This is in the 1500s, so they were doing trade with the Americas, and they were having more like entrepreneurs and stuff in Italy more than anywhere else. It was kind of like the first world country of Europe in the 1500s. And so they were kind of beginning the banking, where people would loan money to do this stuff, and people would be like entrepreneurs and stuff. And one really popular banking family, they were the Medicis from Florence. And they were really rich from doing that, and they commissioned the creation of like that big church, which was like the biggest building in the world, highest building in the world at that time, I think. The Cathedral of Florence. And that's where That's where Michelangelo lived. And he was basically one of the dudes in the court who was just like, who was a really good painter, a really good sculptor, did all this stuff, made a lot of money. And then he moved up to Milan and got a job as like the boss of Milan to try to, like, he wanted to design like weapons for him, like besieging weapons and like cauldrons to bore. I mean, he had all these skits and stuff, these drawings that still survive today, like pouring boiling oil on besiegers. And he tried to even design a helicopter, a flying device, based on the idea of the Archimedes screw, like this screw that would spin around really fast and make you fly. Well, kind of like a helicopter, not quite though. Wasn't successful. Yeah, he was world famous. He ended up moving into the court of the King of France and dying there at the age of like 80 or something. And then there was Michelangelo. And Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they weren't friends. They didn't like each other. I think Michelangelo was jealous of Leonardo da Vinci. He was like 20 years younger. And once they were in Florence together, and Leonardo da Vinci was like, somebody was like, when are you going to paint that thing? Are you going to paint again? He's like, get this guy to paint. He's the painter. And Michelangelo was like, fuck you. I'm not just a painter. I do sculpting too. I'm better than you too. Fuck you, Leonardo. And Leonardo was like, whoa. So, yeah. Michelangelo was kind of Napoleon complex dude. But he did the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo painted the inside of that. And then there were all sorts of other like painters. You had Raphael. Like Italy, the Renaissance was in Italy. Italy was the place that was where everything was going down. Italy didn't have a colonialist power though. The big colonial powers were were Spain, Portugal, France, and England. But Italy didn't do that. They had like a waterway army and stuff. But I think Italy, they just weren't interested in that. Maybe they had already been there, done that with the Roman Empire, and they didn't want to. They just saw that as a headache, you know. They didn't want to deal with it. And in fact, the Pope, and they had the Pope, and the Pope, the Catholic Church was very barbaric in a lot of different ways, and we all know that. But I think, in a lot of ways, they were also saw themselves as being, you know, they're trying to be responsible and helping the world get more and more civilized. And the Pope did object to some bad practices, colonial type practices. The King and Queen of France back in 1492 started the Inquisition. Ferdinand and Isabella, the mother of Catherine of Aragon, who was the wife of Henry VIII, the mother of Bloody Mary. Those were some bad people, Isabel and Ferdinand. They borrowed a lot of money from the Jews. Jews were into loaning money for interest. They borrowed money from all the Jews to attack all of the other kingdoms around Spain so that they can consolidate power in Spain, and also but they also used that money to kick out the Moors and kill all the Moors, and then they decided to go ahead and kill all the Jews so they wouldn't have to pay the Jews back. So then the Jews had to move out to Ireland and Scotland and never got paid back. And so they were bad people. So the Pope was like, you guys are bad, you can't do that. They ended up having a battle with the Pope, and they won. They beat the Pope in some naval battle off the coast of Rome. And so Spain, and then of course like 50 years later, 80 years later, Spain attacked England in the Spanish Armada. So yeah, colonialism wasn't really on the agenda of the Italians. The Italians just wanted to do trade, and that's what Venice was all about. Venice was a big trading empire, and they did some battles with the Ottomans and stuff, but they weren't like colonialists. And so maybe that's good, you know, that made them so that they focused more on their own self, it became an insular society and focused on their artwork and their buildings. So so that is why Spain produced all of these great Renaissance thinkers and artists. And probably, they saw themselves as the inheritors of the Roman Empire. They looked around. They were the ones who looked around and saw Roman aqueducts all over the place, and saw Roman statues everywhere, and herded their goats inside the dried out carcass of the Colosseum. They knew how great the Roman Empire was, and they saw it as this beautiful artistic civilization, and that's what they were after. I think they weren't after conquering the world. They didn't see the greatness of Rome as conquering the world and killing barbarians. They saw the greatness of Rome as art and civilization and wealth, even though they didn't care where the wealth came from. Like Rome back in its height had, some people say, up to 3 million people, but then in the times of the Dark Ages, 20,000. So they had just dried out, emptied out temples all over the place, and administrative buildings and palaces everywhere, just there, and they would build their buildings out of ancient Roman bathhouses and stuff. They would just quarry. Their quarry was the Colosseum. That's why the Colosseum is half taken apart now. If you look at it, it's not from earthquakes. I mean, there was an earthquake there, but it's mainly from people just taking it apart to build Italian houses. And they were even dismantling Rome during the Roman Empire. Back in 536, Rome still had about 1 million people living in it. It was this huge. The Roman Empire had fallen, but Rome, the city, was still kind of like the Roman kingdom. It was this huge city, cultured city, and it was a big city because they had just great aqueduct system, bringing water in. But in the year 536, these Lombards, for some reason, were pissed off at Rome, were afraid Rome was going to try to take over again, and they dismantled their big aqueduct while it still worked. And a lot of their big aqueducts. And so Rome, basically over the course of a few days, I don't know exactly how long, went from 1 million people all the way down to like 12,000. So the death of Rome was actually in 536. And so it was the Italians who were interested in, especially since the printing press, more and more could read. And then they started to read about the ancient history of Rome, and become interested in it again, and try to recreate all of that classical art. They started making, that's why Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci were making, David. Leonardo da Vinci made David. And just trying to be Roman again, making sculptures, and the Medicis started funding it. The Medicis funded all these sculptures to try to recreate the glory of Rome, the artistic glory of Rome. All those statues and paintings, and the Sistine Chapel, and I think other countries, they were along with paying the taxes because they wanted Rome to be up there. Back in those days, when you went to Rome, you would even dress in a toga, So. That was Italy in the 1500s. But then the 1600s came, and that was like a time of big political reform in Europe. And then the 1700s came, and that was a time of big invention. And that was kind of like the century of France. And then the 1800s came, and that was the Industrial Revolution. So that would have been the time of England and the English Empire. And then the late 1800s was when Germany came in. And then in 1871, Italy unified. There were for hundreds of years, there were lots of different countries within present-day Italy. There was the Kingdom of Sicily in southern Italy. There was the Papal States in middle Italy. There was Lombardia in northern Italy. And then you had the other Sicily. There was two kingdoms of Sicilies. I think it was called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Yeah, there's the Kingdom of Sicily in southern England, and then there's the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was the island of Sicily, and then like the island of Corsica or something. And it was kind of confusing because the kings of these Italian, like southern Italian countries, a lot of the time was also the same king as like Castile, like various or Castile, Castile, like various Spanish countries. So it was its own kingdom, but they had the same king as the Spanish king. So they were unified with Spain a lot. And maybe even unified with each other and like shared kings and stuff, even though they were separate kingdoms. Yeah, it's some confusing shit, dude. But yeah, there were all these different kingdoms back then. But then in 1871, this is kind of the rise of nationalism, because in the 1700s, from 1680 to 1780-ish, that was when France pretty much unified, and it was like more of like centralized power. That's why they made the Versailles in France, and so France became strong, and they had a strong army, and they used that strong centralization, to fund a big canal across France and make the French Empire, and then even with Napoleon, attack all those other countries in Europe and take over all those other countries in Europe. So all the other countries in Europe are like, all right, maybe we should consolidate too. And because we all basically speak the same language, all the different kingdoms within our country, we basically speak the same language, trade with each other. Let's like distinguish us from the French, and let's unify. So that's when Germany unified, called themselves Germany. Spain had unified by then. France had. England had. England unified with Scotland in 1707. So then, yes, Italy unified in 1871. And they were unified. But then they had World War I. I don't even know what that was about. That was basically disagreements about something or other. But that spelled the end of the 350-year-old Romanov dynasty in Russia and the Ottoman Empire. But then World War II happened. World War II, there were some economic problems. You had the Great Depression, which started in America but rippled through all of Europe and caused the economic collapse of Germany. In those days, it was called the Weimar Republic, which created the Nazis, which was like, we are Germans, we are not the Jews, get those Jews out of here. They saw the Jews as like this country of people that took over the whole world, and so they didn't care about economic borders or anything, country borders. And I think the Italians were kind of starting to think that way too. They were like, we are the Italians. So they started the fascist party, which was like it comes from the word fascist, which is like, like to fasten. It's this big bundle of sticks, and the idea is that, and that's even on their flag, it's this big bundle of sticks. And the idea is that if the big bundle of sticks is united, you can't break it. Whereas you could break it in individual sticks. So everybody united, all of us country united. And anyways, this was kind of like the end of the aristocratic culture of Europe, where people would just be born into their social cults, their social line, their social place in society, where they could just sit on their ass, and collect taxes and stuff. And people started to like not trust them, and not trust them to look out for the good of the welfare of the people and change laws to make it more appropriate for, to be more fair for the individual people, and not, make only the rich even richer and stuff. Especially after the failure of the decisions of the Tsar of Russia, they were like, screw this. We like the common everyday dude, and that's how Napoleon got ahead. And Napoleon made a lot of good decisions, a lot of good political rules for France. The only problem was he attacked everybody else, which ruined his reputation, credibility. But people still like the idea of the common everyday dude. taking over the country, because they saw them as like as looking out for the common interest of the poor people, and that's why they got Hitler in there, because he was like your common everyday dude, and even Stalin was worse than a common everyday dude. He was a bank robber. But anyways, they elected Mussolini, and Mussolini was one of these common everyday dude type guys. But he was a bad dude. He was a vagrant who didn't really. He was like a gangster. He was like Al Capone, taking over the entire freaking country. It was like the beginning of the mafia, you know. It's actually during the same time as Al Capone. He was like didn't accomplish anything. Wasn't I think he hung out like begging for money like in some part of town. He was a rapist. Yeah, and he took over because he just I guess had the personality to take over the that party, which was fanatical nationalists, and they performed a coup. They violently did a coup d'état, violently took over the bosses of the king or whoever it was. I guess the king of Italy. And then he came in a day later and was like, "Yes, I am Mussolini. I am the new king now." Haha. And yeah, he basically, fascism. It's kind of like Nazism, and he just turned himself into the king, made himself all powerful, and didn't let anybody do what didn't have any freedom at all in the country. Joined on the side of the Nazis, so I guess he partook in the Holocaust. Although the Vatican did not go along with the Holocaust. The Vatican did a lot, and Catholic priests from around Europe did a lot to help the Jews. I mean, the Pope during World War II didn't do anything because he wanted to save his own ass. But he didn't go along with it, and a lot of like Catholics from around Europe like aided in hiding Jews, and he spoke against it after the fact. Obviously he would anyways, but anyways, yeah. But Mussolini was Catholic, and he was supporting the Catholics as well. But anyways, they lynched Mussolini and his wife. They killed him, hung him upside down in public, like a bunch of savages, like we were back in ancient Roman times. And then Italy, and that was only 50 years ago, and then Italy, ever since then, had bounced back and done quite well. I think Italy these days, back in 97 when I went there, it was ranked 4th in like one of those UN charts, like GDP, per capita GDP or something like that. Standard of Living UN or something like that. But they do have problems with mafia. Like a culture of tipping, like if your grandfather dies, you can't just trust the law to let you just buy a tract of land. You have to actually tip the owner of the cemetery extra to let you have him there, and there's lots of confusion. Like 10 years ago, some judges in Italy were bombed by the mafia. So mafia, like the mafiosos from America, like Al Capone and those guys, they all came from Italy, from southern Italy. Southern Italy is different from northern Italy. Northern Italy is kind of like Germany. They're richer, they have their shit together more. Southern Italy, they're more like, I guess, the Spanish. That's where the mafiosos are from. So, and Italy isn't totally polished, but I went to Italy and I liked Italy. It wasn't by any means a country that I didn't like, and there are plenty of those countries that I didn't like. I thought they were total assholes to me in France, and a lot of people were rude to me and like unfair to me in Spain. Although a lot of people were cool in Spain too. But Italy, they didn't seem to have like a Napoleon complex in Italy, or like we hate American. But there was kind of like an air of like criminality. Like there were these kids in Italy who like pretended they were lost. It was like right in front of the Colosseum in Rome, and they held this map like right up to my face, and I was like stupid tourist. I was like, "Oh yeah, look, you're right next to the Colosseum." Like, where are we? We're lost. We're Italians from here, and we're lost. We're right in front of the Colosseum. And then all of a sudden they were like, "Oh wait, we don't need your help anymore. We're out of here." And they ran. I was like, that was weird. And then I felt like my backpack, like the top flap of my backpack, like fall down. So I think they were digging through my backpack, but they suddenly gave up because somebody like saw them. And that was the only place in the world I've ever experienced that, and that was right there in Italy. So, and then there was another weird thing that happened in Italy. I was at the subway, and then the subway came, and then like before I got a chance to jump on, and I was standing right in front of the door when it stopped. Two Italians, got in the subway before me. So they have like a different idea about space in Italy. And all of Europe, but especially in Italy, like they crunch right up next to each other over there. Yeah. Oh, and I remember they drove really fast too. I saw like lots of scooters just zooming down the road like really fast. Lots of them. Narrow roads and stuff. So yeah, they're just intense people, I guess. But I liked Italy. They didn't speak English for shit. I don't know if I met a single freaking Italian who could speak English. But yeah, it seemed like a cool place. The food was great. Pizzas were great. They were really thin. So you had to fold them on top of each other. They weren't like thick, big, thick, dry bread like in America. But it was good. I liked it. And really friendly. Yeah, outgoing, happy, friendly people. Yeah, my ex-wife is Italian now, and her daughter. So, okay, so that's that. History of Italy. Whew.